January 1945. Radange, Belgium. 5 miles from the battlefront. Amid the rumble of artillery and the sounds of distant gunfire, huddled for warmth between 2 Sherman tanks, a tired group of American soldiers sit amid the snowy, war-torn countryside, trying to enjoy a brief moment of rest. A company-sized force now reduced to 60 men. They are wounded, exhausted, hungry, and cold. They've been given a slight reprieve after weeks of combat, rotated back off the trench line to recuperate after many hard battles against fierce resistance. It is only a short respite. In a few days, perhaps even a few hours, they'll be sent back to the battle lines for a deadly assault on hardened German defensive positions. A jeep appears, winding down the snowy dirt path towards them. 4 men are inside. As it rolls to a stop, one of them exits. He wears the uniform of an American soldier. NCO stripes on his sleeve, a sharpshooter badge with a bar designating skill with the Browning automatic rifle. It's Mickey Rooney, the most famous comedic actor in the world. He's been in films with Elizabeth Taylor and Judy Garland, big international Hollywood feature films, dozens of them. He's a millionaire, a movie star, and now he's here in Belgium on the front lines. The soldiers look at each other, shock on their faces, as Rooney produces a guitar from the back of the Jeep and checks to make sure it's still in tune. He looks tired. His uniform and Jeep are covered in mud, dirt, and snow, but he smiles. Hey, you boys are doing a great job out here fighting for our country. You want to hear a song? Hello, and welcome back to Badass of the Week. My name is Ben Thompson, and I am here today with a special guest. I'm here with author Robert B. O'Connor. He is the author of Jeep Show, A Trooper at the Battle of the Bulge, and the nonfiction book Gumptionade, a booster for your self-improvement plan. Robert, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's really great to have you here.
Ben, I'm really pleased to be here to talk with you and your listeners. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, of course. And so you are an author of World War II. So Jeep Show is a fiction story, but it is set within the obviously the reality of the Battle of the Bulge in World War II. Where did you get the idea to work on this book?
I was doing research on the circus, and I found out about a certain circus promoter named Jim Hetzer, who is long gone. I managed to contact his daughter, and she said to me, among other things, by the way, did you know that he was an enlisted entertainer in World War II? And I said, no, I did not know that there was such a thing as an enlisted entertainer in World War II. And she said, oh, yes. And he worked with Mickey Rooney doing Jeep shows for combat troops in areas where the USO and the Red Cross could not go. And I thought, a light came on, and I thought, wow, this is a story worth investigating and telling. And that's how I found out about this very forgotten aspect of World War II U.S. Army morale boosting efforts.
That's funny. It sounds like, this happens to me when I'm doing research for the show sometimes, where you'll start reading about one thing and then you start clicking on links, and the next thing you know, you're in a completely different area that you weren't expecting. And you have to stop and be like, I don't know how I got here. I forgot what I was actually looking for.
Yes. One of the things that I find is research is fun and writing is hard. So I have to be very careful that I don't.
Oh my gosh.
I don't, just avoid the hard part and just keep researching and researching and researching.
That happens to me. Yeah, I always say it's like you're panning for gold. You just dig through as much stuff as you can find, and you just start to like find the nuggets. But yeah, just the stacks and stacks of like books and research and all this stuff, and then you fall into these other things where, like, you know, for the show here, I like to find stories of badasses from history, but in researching them, you come across several others. So I'll have all these notes like, oh, you know, I've got to come back and check out this guy. Or I'll make a note in my margins here. I've got index cards of like, oh, these are people that I came across their story. I don't want to get distracted. I just got to keep doing what I'm doing, but I'm going to come back and look up more of this because it was an interesting bit. So that kind of sounds like what's happening here a little bit.
Yes. And I will tell you this, when you're writing, you know, you write your book and you write several drafts and then you give it to what's called a developmental editor. And the development editor says things like, you know, chapter 2 is awful, just get rid of it. Chapter 3 should be 2 chapters. And this was literally told to me on my first book. You know, it's a shame to end such a good book with such a terrible last chapter. So I had over-researched and overwritten this book and had many chapter-long flashbacks, which no longer exist, that the editor removed for me. So yes, I know exactly. I went down many rabbit holes, and unfortunately, I stopped and wrote about them.
Yes. Yeah, I ran into that a little bit. For fiction, it's a little harder, right? Because I haven't done fiction before. I've drafted a novel, but I haven't sent it to any editors or anything yet. Yeah, thanks. That was a thing I'd been wanting to do for like 15 years, and I finally got it done. But it's very hard when you have to write dialogue. I feel like that's a thing that I've never really had to do writing nonfiction. You have to write not dialogue, and that's hard. And then I have this nightmare of like what you said, like, can you just take this character out? Okay. Can you combine these two characters into one? Okay, well, that's like, I got to rewrite the whole book now.
Yeah,
with,
they
the
do
nonfiction
that.
Stuff I've been doing.
Yes, they do that to you, Ben. You can expect that.
With the nonfiction stuff, there's some things where it's like, actually, like one of the best pieces of advice I ever got, because I was writing nonfiction for the first Badass book, and my editor was like, take out the first and last paragraph of every chapter. He's like, because in the first one you set it up, here's why this guy's interesting, and then at the end you say, here's why he was interesting. He's like, just cut those 2 paragraphs out. And I was like, wow, it actually tightens everything, but you did chop like 20% of the book. Right. Tighten it up.
Yes, editors are absolutely crucial to turn your work into something that some other person might care to read.
Yes, editors are the unsung heroes, including the editors of this podcast who listen to us talk and cut it down to make us sound like we're smart.
I can't wait.
I'm significantly more articulate in the edited version of the podcast that makes it onto the feed.
I'll definitely have to tell my wife.
So you came across something called Jeep shows. And, you know, for me, enlisted entertainer is a new term as well. When you think of the USO and performing entertainment for soldiers, you picture Bob Hope up on the stage and, you know, these big shows that are generally not in, you know, battlefield scenarios, kind of far back for people who are kind of on some R&R time to get these USO shows. So what's a Jeep show?
A Jeep show was intended, it was basically 3 enlisted entertainers. So that is military occupation specialty 442 in the 40s, were entertainment specialists. 3 entertainment specialists and a driver would literally go in a Jeep. They would sometimes have a trailer to take equipment with them, microphones, possibly even a set. But they would drive up to just behind the front lines, probably about half a mile, where combat infantry would be brought back for a hot meal, sometimes a shower and a uniform exchange. And these 3 performers would essentially perform what Mickey Rooney calls a K-ration version of a variety show. So K-rations were the meals that soldiers at the front line mostly ate, convenient canned food. So
like the freeze dried or the canned version of a regular meal. So that's kind
exactly. This was the canned version of a variety show. So they would, one of the three would almost always have an instrument, often an accordion, but maybe a guitar. And they would sing and they would dance and they would do jokes and two-man routines. And they would always pull a soldier out of the audience to perform for his buddies. This was often the high point of the show. Although if you saw Mickey Rooney perform, that was a great show. And then they would stick around a little bit after the show, drink some coffee, smoke some cigarettes, because for the combat soldiers, it wasn't just that they were getting a great show. It was that these guys came all the way up to the front to entertain them, to be present for them. And, that was a big deal to the combat infantry.
So that's an interesting thing that you bring up. So like, why was this so important? Why would the Army hire a driver and three entertainers, enlisted men entertainers, to drive around and do why is comedy so important to these guys who are on the front lines? They were just fighting and getting artillery shelled, and now they're coming back here to get a comedy show. Like why is that so important to the war effort and to the men that were participating in this?
As Napoleon said, morale is to the material as 3 is to 1. And the Army went to great lengths to try to support or increase morale of soldiers, both rear echelon soldiers and also frontline. But for the frontline soldiers, it was very limited because they were in combat areas. So, these entertainment specialists had only 2 jobs. One was these Jeep shows, and then the other, which they mostly did after the war was over, was soldier shows where the cast and the crew of a play would be entirely soldiers. So the Army also had other morale building efforts. But again, a lot of these didn't reach the front line. They constantly showed movies. Often Hollywood would give the movie to the Army before it was released in the States during the war. The Army had would give athletic equipment so that the soldiers could play ball. Again, they weren't playing ball at the front lines. And then there was a incredible program called Armed Forces Edition, where the most popular books of the era were printed in a way that they would fit in the pocket of a Army field jacket. And they literally sent millions and millions of Armed Forces Edition books over to the Pacific Theater and also the European Theater of Operations. So the Army was very concerned with soldiers' morale. Of course, Ben, what I found is for combat soldiers, the most important morale booster was each other. They really ended up, the interviews I read and saw, the soldiers in combat, because that is such a excruciating and terrible experience. They really fought for each other after a while. It wasn't so much democracy or anti-fascism. It was
That's
for
the thing,
each
right?
other.
You see that in all this, in every war, because I do a lot of military history stuff. And it doesn't matter what war you're talking about, what part of the world, what time period, even if you go back to like the Roman times and stuff, you talk to, you read some of these guys' accounts and they were like, we were there because we had to be there. And like, yeah, we were there for our guys, our friends. And like, a lot of the badasses I write about, they're like, yeah, you can, I got the medal, but every guy there was just as brave as me. And every other guy there deserves the medal as well. And, you see this camaraderie that builds between soldiers that you really, it's kind of, you have to be in such a huge, high stress, high danger situation to build that level of camaraderie. It doesn't really come from anywhere else.
Absolutely. It's very, very deep. And, the American soldiers in World War II, as American soldiers now, are citizen soldiers. And, they voted in the elections. Their wives and their parents wrote letters to their congressmen, complaining about things. And they had a healthy skepticism about their officers and, really didn't care for this military hierarchy, which they called chicken shit. They ended up having very strong relationships with each other. And, essentially.
Right. It transcends politics. Like, it doesn't matter who you voted for, whether you think we should be here or not. We're here now, and they're trying to kill us. So we need to we need to work together to make sure that doesn't happen.
And wounded soldiers who weren't too badly wounded would try very hard to get back to their unit, even leaving the hospital before they were discharged, because that feeling of mutual support with their buddies was so strong.
Yeah, we've come across those stories a lot of somebody who's just like, I can't stay here. Like they gotta, I'm not going to lay down while everybody else is out there working.
Exactly. While my buddies are out there. Yeah.
And so for the enlisted entertainers, I kind of think of this as, in like an action movie where you'll have, everything's going badly for the heroes. They keep losing. They keep getting beat up. Everybody's all kind of like, having a really hard time, and there's a lot more danger coming, but there's always that scene in the movie. It's usually like the Act 3 break. Even like Saving Private Ryan has this where they kind of sit there and they're like listening to music and they're hanging out, they're having a drink or they're having a smoke. They have this one moment where all of the heroes who've been bickering with each other the whole movie, they all sit down, and then there's some moment where they all kind of come together, and usually it involves some sort of camaraderie or music or whatever. Yeah. And this entertaining enlisted entertainers kind of almost seems like not only like you've just come back you've been shelled for 3 weeks. Right. You come back, you have this moment where you can have this get together with your friends, have this really nice night. And then there's even a cameo appearance by a famous actor who shows up and says, this guy's one of the biggest movie. You were talking about Mickey Rooney. He's one of the biggest movie stars in the world when he's doing this. And he's, he's within, he can hear the artillery at Bastogne, and he's out there performing, stand-up comedy for you. Right. I feel like that is very powerful.
Absolutely.
And it requires a lot of bravery on behalf of the entertainers, because, we're going to get into, we'll kind of walk through Mickey Rooney's story, but sure. I kind of want to stay on the idea of this Jeep show right now, where he is one of the biggest entertainers in the world. He is like, wealthy and famous, and he doesn't have to be in Europe in the Ardennes forest performing out of the back of a Jeep for a bunch of guys who are out there fighting. And it's dangerous for him. There were like rumors, especially in the Ardennes, of infiltrators, like German soldiers dressed in American uniforms operating behind the lines. And this is dangerous for him to be here, and it required a lot of bravery for him to do that.
One wrong turn in the dark by your driver, and you could be behind the German lines, and captured or killed that way. So yes, it was.
Yeah, or even just stray artillery fire, airstrike. Right, like there's all kinds of dangers that are even though you're not looking enemy soldiers in the eyes down an iron sight, like you are in the blast zone. You are in
yes, absolutely. You're in danger. That's well said. Well said. You are in the combat zone, the wounding and killing zone for sure.
Mm-hmm. And but he volunteered to do this. That's correct, right?
Yeah, he could have, he could have done his wartime service 10 minutes. He could have enlisted and done his wartime service at Hal Roach Studios, which was 10 minutes from his Hollywood mansion. They did a lot of...
Buy war bonds.
Right. They did a lot of films for the government, and all service veterans will tell you, or most of them, that all service is honorable. Ronald Reagan did his World War II service at Hal Roach Studios. Mickey Rooney chose to go all in. And, I've read a couple of autobiographies of Mickey Rooney, and I've kind of formulated my own guess, which is by the 1942-43, Mickey Rooney's party constant party lifestyle off the set. He was a very hard worker on set and a genius performer. Certainly with Charlie Chaplin considered, the most talented actor of the first half of that century by many directors. But offset, his life was just absolutely out of control. He was married to Ava Gardner, the most beautiful woman in Hollywood, and he cheated on her. He went through Hollywood starlets like a hot knife through butter. He partied, and I just have suspected that in his mind he felt, perhaps unconsciously, that if he didn't get far away from Hollywood, it would kill him. And so,
he just needed something, right? Needed to change into something different. So let's set the stage for Mickey Rooney here, because let's kind of set him up for people who might not be familiar with him or his work. So let's kind of start at the beginning here, talking about Mickey Rooney. Can you kind of set up his background and his career leading up to where we're at in the story right now? Yeah.
Mickey Rooney started in vaudeville. His parents were vaudeville performers, so he was literally on stage, as a young child. He did films in the early days of Hollywood films as a child, and then he got into the roles. He did many movies at all times, but he was best known for.
He's from, and this goes back to like the 20s, right? So like 1920, exactly. That might even be before there was sound in movies, right?
Yeah.
And so he's an original. Like, he's born in 1920, but he starts acting in 26. And so that is like you said, he's like Charlie Chaplin, like time period. Yeah. He's an early Hollywood guy. Early Hollywood guy, and again
a child actor, started as a young child. The roles that he's most remembered for before the war are of Andy Hardy. And the Andy Hardy movies, and there was about 7 or 8 of them, were extremely successful commercially, where Mickey Rooney played a lovable, slightly confused teenager who would, have great ideas and get into trouble and get great advice from his father, and just nice American stories. Puck in Shakespeare's Midsummer Night's Dream, which was a film production with Hollywood actors. Jimmy Cagney was in it, and I think he was about 15 when he did that role, and he was absolutely brilliant in that role. So he was, by 1939, he was the #1 Hollywood box office star, by far, #1 worldwide box office star. But, he was getting older. And by the way, Mickey Rooney was 5'1". So as he would joke, he was too short to be a leading man and too tall to be a producer. And
that wasn't a big deal when he was playing,
right?
Basically like the main character on a sitcom you'd see these days or something, where he's the kid and he has, some awkward thing happens, and then like you said, he gets some good advice, and then he defeats the bullies or gets the girl or whatever. But that's harder when you're once you get into like your 30s and you're 5'1", you can't play the kid roles anymore, but
exactly.
It's harder when you don't have the height to, it makes it a little trickier.
I wrote in the book, he was America's biggest box office attraction from 1938 through 1940. At age 24, he's in the Army now. As the number of Americans under arms snowballed in 43, Rooney felt public pressure to join the fight. Like the main character in the book, he enlisted in March of 1944, 3 months before D-Day. National Velvet with Elizabeth Taylor, where Rooney plays a jockey, which was, by the way, a recurring, unfortunately, playing a jockey was a recurring role for Mickey Rooney because of his height. So I wrote, Mickey Rooney can sing as well as Bing Crosby. He dances like a third Nicholas brother. He does brilliant slapstick and stand-up comedy. He writes songs. He plays piano and drums. He once learned the banjo in a day. Laurence Olivier considers Rooney the best there has ever been. There's nothing in show business Mickey Rooney can't do except grow an inch over 5'1" or control himself. He has bees in his bonnet.
Or control himself.
Right.
Yeah. And learning the banjo in a day, that's like it's not an easy jump from the guitar to the banjo because it's strung
I
differently.
know.
So it's not like you can just pick up a banjo if you know how to play the guitar.
Right. And, there's a great quote I came across, talent does what it can, genius does what it must. And he was a genius. And of course, where there are great strengths, there are corresponding weaknesses. And his weaknesses showed up in his, when he wasn't working. So just to end it, couldn't grow an inch over 5'1" or control himself. He has bees in his bonnet. He still thinks his monstrous talent is a studio pass on life. He is not yet aware he has no friends. He is not yet aware that he can chew the scenery, but he cannot eat the world. That was Mickey Rooney by 1942.
Yeah, and so he gets drafted as a lot of Americans do, but like you said, he had the option of staying in Hollywood and being on TV and doing doing the same thing he's doing on the front lines, but he could do it in front of a camera and have that be sent to the army as hey, watch this, watch this video that was recorded in Hollywood. But he's standing out in the cold in front of a Jeep doing this for real soldiers in person. And, like you said, there's the thing, because he does have this kind of squeaky clean public persona in his characters, but behind the scenes, he's up there and he'll do, songs with Judy Garland, and he's kind of this all shucks character. But then behind the scenes, he is drinking and partying, and he's kind of all in on all of this stuff, right? Like you see with a lot of child actors kind of run into this as well. They grow up in Hollywood and they kind of get into this life. And maybe it was that he wanted some kind of change. Maybe it was that, something needed to change in his life. But
I was just going to say, I think he was hoping he'd grow up. At the Army, as it did to so many young, so many teenage boys, that the Army would make a man out of him,
Yeah. And it's just, the entire country is mobilized here. And we talked a little bit about this before we started recording, which is, I did a World War II history book for my Guts and Glory series, which is for middle school, high school age kids. And one thing that is really interesting is to talk about what's happening on the home front while the war is going on, because we think about, baseball and music and movies, we always kind of have the idea of the history of that. Oh yeah, Wizard of Oz, Ted Williams hit 400. But to think of, we don't really always put that in context of like some of this stuff was happening concurrently with World War II. We kind of have a tendency when we think about history to compartmentalize. World War II is happening in Europe, and then over here is music and movies and television is all happening in this kind of different universe. But, one interesting thing is you mentioned Bing Crosby. Bing Crosby was the most successful musician in the United States. He had the #1 hits for most of the war. And then to think that like there were people like Mickey Rooney who were successful actors, and then they get drafted into that and they go over there, and people are still in the US listening to the watching his movies and listening to his radio broadcasts. He was doing some stuff for the Armed Forces Network. And there's just something really powerful about everybody got mobilized to participate in this war, right?
Yes. Ben, one of the things that's hard for us to imagine, possibly even impossible, there were 16 million, mostly men, but 16 million people in the service. So literally, and then there was another, 10 million people working in war industries, making airplanes, making weapons, making stuff. So every family in America was touched by the war every day, whether it was like my grandparents who their sons were overseas during the war, they must have worried every day about their sons, my father and my uncle. So it was, America was all in because everybody, had a relative, or if not that, a neighbor who was involved. And so, Hollywood was all in. Children were doing scrap metal drives around their neighborhood. People were, because of rations, people were cooking differently, and there were victory gardens. It was a different experience than we have now.
Yeah, and there's just something that's like, very interesting of, there's a picture that I found when I was looking through this, and it's him standing there, and it's not like he's not on a big stage. You see the Bob Hope stuff where he's on the stage and there's this huge sea of people and they're in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, and this is not that. This is like he's there in his uniform, like doesn't even have a microphone. He's surrounded by soldiers sitting around him. He's just in a field in Germany doing stand-up or singing or whatever it is that he's doing in this picture, but like everybody around him looks pretty happy. And so it's kind of wild. It would be like, you're on the front lines and then you go back and there's, I don't know, the most successcesul actor in the world, The Rock is going to go do stand-up for you or something, right? Like, before you get back out there. There is the bit too that like this couldn't have been easy work to do. I feel like improv comedy on a battlefield is an increased degree of difficulty.
Right. Good point. Now, do remember that Rooney was an absolute genius. So
that's what you were saying, that like everybody who
it
talked
was
to
hard
him
on
just
the
was
other.
Like, this guy could do anything.
The other two guys, entertainment soldiers that worked with him, really had to be on their toes because he would change up the routines on the fly and do other things to keep himself entertained. Yeah, this was rough work. They did as many. Basically, they would go from one strong point, one group of combat soldiers to another, and they did as many as 11 shows in a day. And these are hour-long shows. So. And we have to remember, unlike and Bob Hope did brilliant work for the USO, take nothing away from him.
Sure, absolutely.
But these guys were under orders. So, if they were ordered to do 11 shows in a day, they did 11 shows in a day. It was the Army. And the conditions were rough. I didn't even think
about that. Yeah.
That's that's an 18-hour day. And
because you're driving, and this is like, this isn't an Army Jeep. There's not a heating, air conditioning. There's not a top. There's not a roof, right? You're driving in the rain. You're driving in the snow, muddy fields,
And there's always
bomb craters.
There's always the fear that some German saboteur has, strung a wire at head height across the road because they were known to do that. So, it was hard duty. It was hard duty, at the front. Yeah. And then they also, not at the front, but also hard duty. They did a huge amount of visits to wounded soldiers in hospitals. And this is not fun. This is not fun to see some of the soldiers are so grievously wounded. And, it's like, hey, go entertain this guy that lost all his buddies and both of his legs, a week ago.
That's a tough crowd, right? Can you make this guy laugh?
Exactly.
Sing a song for that guy.
Yeah, tough crowd, and tough to be among that and trying to boost spirits. So, this guy's so badly wounded, we don't even know if he can really hear you. Right. He's probably not going to make it, but can you just make him happy for a minute? Give him your Edward G. Robinson imitation, anyways. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Mickey Rooney was a superb mimic, but among his many talents, he was excellent at voices. So that was a big part of his routine as well.
Yeah, I mentioned The Rock earlier, but there's that thing where it's just like, okay, he was in like, he's like, okay, he can sing now too. He plays guitar and sings as well as being like a professional athlete and an actor.
Right.
Well, you can't just be. I think about that with when I watch NFL football, these guys are giant in the NFL, and you're like, oh, television and video games and movies have conditioned me to believe that this guy's much bigger than me, but I might have a speed advantage. No, you don't. He's bigger than you, faster, stronger. He can touch his toes. He can jump higher than you.
Right.
Just beats you at everything, and it's not fair.
Right.
It kind of sounds like that's the vibe of Mickey Rooney, among other Hollywood people who kind of are already have achieved like the pinnacle of their career.
Yeah.
This guy sounds like he was a step above even them. Like they look at him like, oh, that he's like a whole other thing.
He and Charlie Chaplin were kind of in their own, in their own league.
When Mickey Mantle was at his height, in baseball, you come up through the minor leads, right? You've got A, AA, AAA, and then you go to the major leagues. But when Mickey Mantle was at his prime, one of the other guys on this team was like, it's like he got sent down from a higher division.
Right. Yes. Good point. I saw many Yankee games in the mid '60s.
It's like he got sent down from some other league. But speaking of baseball, Ted Williams is part of the war effort, and we've got a lot of other we have a lot of other, like you said, Hollywood sports. Everybody's getting involved in the war effort here, and so we have some other interesting celebrities. You had mentioned that you were, when it became a thing that you were interested in, was famous people and their participation in the war. Right.
Well, the ultimate badass Hollywood actor, Hollywood performer, Hollywood person in World War II was Jimmy Stewart, the famous
absolutely.
actor.
That's who I was going to go with.
He was a licensed pilot before the war and joined the Army Air Force. The Air Force was part of the Army back then, and quickly rose through the ranks and became a squadron leader and flew 20 combat missions over Nazi-occupied Germany, piloting a B-24 Liberator bomber. This was as dangerous as being a frontline infantry soldier, possibly more.
Maybe more. I remember I think if you flew 20, that was it. Like it was too dangerous for you to keep going. If you successfully flew 20 missions, you were done.
Yes.
Because you weren't the odds were not good that you were going to keep going.
Well, and it wasn't just that. One of the advantages we had over the Germans and the Japanese was we rotated these pilots. If they survived 20, and they often didn't, we rotated them home to train other pilots. The Germans and the Japanese just kept them flying, and they were all eventually killed or wounded, and they just ran out of pilots. So our system was both, you've done your duty, you survived 20 extremely hazardous missions, but also you're going back to raise up more pilots. So, but he was a commander with the 445th Bomb Group. He actually got promoted to colonel during the war and was given a Distinguished Flying Cross and the French Croix de Guerre, and just incredible story of true valor and badassness.
And he was doing this, like he had already won an Oscar. Like he was an Oscar winning, he was best male actor.
Yeah.
When he went there, he had done Philadelphia Story and got the Oscar for it. And then like a year or two later, joined the Army and flew a bunch of bomber missions over enemy territory.
Led a bunch of
shot
bomber
at
missions. Yeah, absolutely. So really, I'm full of admiration. For imagine if, Brad Pitt was in Afghanistan, leading a combat, leading a company of the 28th Division, or, Brad Pitt was in, at the point. That's what it was.
There's nothing like this, right? I mean, the closest thing I can think of is like maybe Pat Tillman, who like left the NFL to go fight in Afghanistan, but there's nothing like this anymore. This,
we are not all in on with our military anymore. That's not all bad, I guess. It's a mixed blessing, but it was a
yeah. I mean, a lot of
different
Americans
time.
died in World War II, right? So there's not it's nice that we don't have a world conflict that requires that right now.
Exactly.
But,
yes.
But yeah, it's hard to fathom it. It's hard to think about it because we've never experienced anything like that.
Correct.
In the lifetimes of most people who are around today.
Correct. Yeah. And the World War II generation is, the last survivors of it are leaving us every day.
Yeah. So, okay. So let's get back to Mickey Rooney. He is now he's a huge star. He leaves, he goes and does these Jeep shows for some time, right? Isn't he he's deployed for a year or two, right?
He's deployed. Oh yeah, he's deployed. He's overseas for about a year and a half. And they were doing these Jeep shows, interestingly, they came over, this group of entertainment specialists, including Mickey Rooney, came over as part of kind of a big show that was in the rear echelon. It was called Hip Hooray, and it had a army band, and it was a bunch of skits, and Mickey Rooney was the star. But they got to Europe, and a famous Broadway director named Joshua Logan, who was Captain Joshua Logan in the Morale Corps at that point, realized that the frontline troops would never see this show. This show would run in Paris, and the frontline troops would never see it. So Logan came up with the concept of he broke up the show and put the entertainers in Jeep show squads. So that was around August, September of 44. And, they kept doing these kinds of things, through the end of the war, which the Germans surrendered in May of 45. And then probably, did some of them after things calmed down. Because
you still had people were still dying after the ceasefire. There were still booby traps, and you were still deployed overseas. It was still dangerous.
Millions. There were millions. Like that. The millions of soldiers that were overseas at the end of the war, both in the Pacific and in Germany, and there simply wasn't enough transportation to get them home. My father was sent to the south of France for a year after the war ended, just to have a place to put him while he waited for his, seat on the boat home.
Yeah. And that's, like you said, morale is important for those guys too, because they're missing home and the war's over. And what are we still doing here?
Right. And remember, they have access to guns and alcohol and vehicles. So and
there are like pockets of resistance. Like you can't you are still kind of, are still, especially if people deployed in Germany, there are still some people who don't want you there.
Right. Oh,
that wish you hadn't come.
Definitely.
And so there's that.
So Rooney was probably overseas about 18 months. And his, while he was overseas, whoever he left behind taking care of he had a racing stables. He was a gambling addict and loved horse racing, and he did not mind spending money, by the way. And his racing stables went bankrupt, and his production company went bankrupt while he was serving overseas. So he came back.
Oh wow! Like his people ran it into the ground, not him.
Right.
He has some problems, and maybe we should. This is a good time to get into that because the war ends, and he goes back home, and he has kind of put everything on hold. He could have been making movies. He had some good years where he was a very talented guy and could have been making movies or being on TV, or he's got this 2 to 3 year gap now in his career, this hole in his resume basically, where he was trying to help the war effort, help perform for soldiers. While he's doing that, his production company and the people he left in charge are kind of messing everything up. He comes back, and then after the war, he doesn't come home, the boat pulling into New York and everybody's waving and there's the parade and everything's awesome and he rides off into the sunset happily ever after. It doesn't work like that when the war ends for him.
He was considering that he was absolute, he was a genius performer, but he was no businessman. He was unwise starting his own production company, which he did right before he left him. He was tired of working for Louis Mayer, the man who ran MGM. So he started his own production company, and that may have been a ill-fated attempt to be a leading man, because, you know, if you're producing your own movies, you can give yourself whatever part you want.
Sure. And you don't have to split the earnings with Louis Mayer either.
But, you know, Ben, like podcasting, it's a lot harder than it looks. and so by the time he gets back from Europe, he's essentially broke. You know, his businesses are his production business and his racing stables are completely underwater. He is now really too old to be Andy Hardy by far, although they do make one last Andy Hardy movie. It's not very successful. And then he has to make his way, you know, and he had some very, very tough times after that. So he was gone. His career had taken a nosedive. He was considered too old or too short. People did kind of forget about him. But he, instead of just fading away, he really hustled. He did stage work. He did voice acting. When TV came along in 52, he had one of the original TV series. It was called the Mickey Rooney Show. No one remembers because it only lasted about a season, but he tried that, declared bankruptcy twice, but bounced back. He was in over 300 films, did stage productions. At one point, probably the lowest ebb of his fortunes, somebody might have a dinner party, and they would hire Mickey Rooney to come to their dinner party and do his routine. And so he was performing for, 12 people or something like that.
Yeah. You had mentioned this before when we were talking about, who you wanted to talk about on the show, because there were a lot of options. I was just like, pick your favorite celebrity from World War II and we could talk about them. And so you had said something that I really liked, which was that the show Badass of the Week is about people who face adversity and overcome it, usually through perseverance. And this is a great example of that. So he was this huge star early on, child actor, star, goes over, serves, comes back, and things are bad. Like you said, he's doing dinner shows for people in Hollywood. He, that's not what he was hoping for when he created his own production company and bought a racing stables. But he doesn't give up, and he doesn't let that get him down. His career doesn't end here. It keeps going, and he's able to work hard and fight through this and make something better, right?
Yeah. And the way I think of it is he never lost sight of what his work was, and his work was performing, and he never lost sight of it. And to some extent, probably there's just as much, value to doing a show for 12 people, doing a dinner party show, as there is doing a hit movie, and that you're doing your work. And that was his work. And when I think about, persevering through hard times, and we all have hard times, that focus on what's your work, what were you put here to do? For me, that can really be an anchor in the worst of times. And it certainly was for Mickey Rooney.
I think about, I watched, I think about, I've done shows where I've done book readings and things where I'll go to do a book reading and nobody shows up, right? Or like, two people show up and you're going to do the thing for them. But like, all right, well, when I was doing the tour for the second Badass book, I did one show, and it was a bookstore, and it was packed out. They had to bring in chairs from like the next door place to fit people in. And then the next day I went to one, and it was in this basement, and there was nobody there. And then one guy walked in, and I was like, "Are you here for the reading?" He's like, "No, my name is also Ben Thompson, and I saw your sign outside, and I thought it'd be cool to come meet you." And I was like, okay. Do you
All
want a
right,
book?
Ben, sit your ass down because you're going to hear some of my
I'm about to do. I'm gonna talk to you about it for an hour.
Yeah. Ben, both my books are incredibly different one from the other. One's a nonfiction kind of self-help book, and the other is a very interesting story about an unknown group of soldiers in World War II and the Battle of the Bulge. But they're both about morale.
Yeah, that's true, isn't it? Because I haven't read. I didn't get to read Gumptionade, but I did read Jeep Show.
Oh,
and
thank you.
I thought it was really good. I really enjoyed it. Do you want to? Let's give. Why don't you give a little overview of what the book's about?
Despite it's, by the way, Mickey Rooney is a very notable character in Jeep Show, but he is not the protagonist, because if he was, he would just eat the whole book by himself. So I had to. But despite a fatherhood deferment, 30-year-old dance instructor Jim Tanzer enlists in the Army in 1943. Stella, his wife, more talented, by the way, and partner in their dance act, regrets his choice. The book has flashbacks to Jim's childhood time, his time in the Civilian Conservation Corps during the Depression, a hitch as a circus clown, and his difficulties trying to make it in show business in New York in the late 1930s. Jim enlists in the Army in 43 and goes for paratrooper, but he gets assigned to the Morale Corps because of his show business background. He's classified MOS 442, which now your listeners know means entertainment specialist. After training camps, Private Jim Tanzer is shipped to the European Theater of Operations and assigned to Jeep shows. 3 enlisted entertainers put on shows in the front lines. Private Mickey Rooney leads Jim's squad. Separated from his Jeep Show squad and caught up in the Battle of the Bulge, Jim retreats to Bastogne, where he is attached to Team Snafu. Team Snafu actually existed at Bastogne. It was a hastily organized unit of survivors from overrun infantry companies, dismounted tankers and artillerymen, as well as clerks, bakers, mechanics, and other rear echelon soldiers pressed into combat to support the famous 101st Airborne Division at Bastogne. And, not only clerks and bakers and mechanics, but in the book, one entertainment specialist as well.
Yes. And the story gets kind of wild from there.
Yeah, the story gets wild from there, but it is historically, I made very certain that World War II buffs who have read the book, and many have, I'm happy to say, have no objection to my telling of the story. I haven't violated anything that actually happened that would have prevented this. I did create out of my own mind. Jim organizes a show on Christmas Day at Bastogne among soldiers. It's put on for the wounded soldiers in the basements at Bastogne, and I won't give away too much other than the show gets him in a lot of trouble with the officers the next day. So Jim is at Bastogne. He goes on to participate in the liberation of a concentration camp. Ben, I just wanted to tell that story because it is such a fundamentally important fact about the war and for the American and I suppose the Russian soldiers who liberated concentration camps. Another searing and, unbelievable experience they had in the war. And then he serves in occupied Germany after the war and has several adventures there. So that's the plot of it. It is historically accurate, except I made up, as I said earlier, the protagonist, Jim Tanzer, is inspired by a real entertainment soldier. But once we started the Battle of the Bulge, I made up a storyline that involved this soldier.
Right. That's historical fiction. You're able to take some license. You're able to take license in some places and not others.
Yes.
The tanks don't have steering wheels,
Right. Yes.
That kind of thing.
I have none of those faux pas. I just made up a few things.
These are within the acceptable parameters of historical fiction.
Right. Right. And I put in a few Easter eggs for World War II buffs. One is there was something called M1 Thumb, when the M1 was the standard issue rifle.
Oh, yeah,
in the
Grand
war.
Thumb, yeah.
And yes, exactly. You know, it had a 8-round clip, and when you loaded the clip into the rifle, the bolt shot back very quickly, and if you were inexperienced, you left your thumb trailing there, and the bolt would close on your thumb, and you would get a very, very deep bruise on your thumb. And I put that one in there for the World War II buffs, and they've liked it.
Okay, well, the book is called Jeep Show: A Trooper at the Battle of the Bulge, and the author is Robert B. O'Connor. Robert, thank you so much for coming on the show and talking to us about Mickey Rooney and World War II badasses and unsung badasses of the war, unsung heroes.
Oh, yes.
Whose contributions were very important to the war effort, but don't necessarily. Although Mickey Rooney got a Bronze Star for performing.
He did get a Bronze Star, which was some of the other entertainment soldiers were like, oh, sure. Where's my Bronze Star? I was there too.
Not a lot of people have a Bronze Star and an Emmy,
right.
a Golden Globe.
Good point. And I think he won a
strange version of the EGOT.
he won a juvenile Oscar in 1937 as well. So he's got it all. The last thing I'll say is two last things. One is, my father served overseas in the war, as did his 17-year-old younger brother, my Uncle George. And writing this, I never talked with my dad about his service. He never talked to me about it. So this I felt, closer to him by understanding what it was like. And second thing is, I am giving $1 per copy sold to a organization called Shield and Stripes, which helps veterans with mental health issues. I would give them all the profits from the book, but as I told them, $1 per copy is way, way, way more.
Yeah. Well, that is great. Where can people find the book?
The book is on Amazon. Just enter Jeep Show Book into the search area, or bookshop.org if you don't like Amazon, or ask your local bookseller to order you a copy. It is available as an audiobook, a printed book, and an ebook, of course. And I will tell you one last thing, Ben, from writing, one of the best ways to catch all the typos in your book, even after you think you've got them, is to sit in the studio and listen to an actor read your book for the audio book, because about every 8 pages, Zach would stop and say, did you mean to repeat this word twice? And, this doesn't make any sense. So anyways, it's available in any format you want. And I'd be pleased. There's a website called jeepshowbook.com to ask me questions and see pictures of Mickey Rooney and some of the other entertainers.
Yeah, when I published my first book, I had read through it 15 times, and I published it, and they sent me the first copy. It was the day it was released. They sent me a copy, and I opened it up, and the first word I looked at was spelled wrong.
Yes, you absolutely cannot proofread your own stuff, because you just absolutely can't.
Yeah. Okay, well, the book is Jeep Show. The author is Robert B. O'Connor. Bob, thank you so much for talking to us today. It was really great having you on.
Hey, it's been a treat. Thank you, Ben.
All right, thank you so much. Stay badass. Badass of the Week is produced by High Five Content. Executive producers are me, Ben Thompson, Dr. Patricia Larish, and Andrew Jacobs. Writing is by me and Pat. Story editing by Ian Jacobs. Mixing and music and sound design by Jude Brewer. Special thanks to Noel Brown at iHeartRadio. Badass of the Week is based on my website, badassoftheweek.com, where you can read all sorts of stories about other badasses. If you want to reach out with questions or ideas, you can email us at badasspodcast@badassoftheweek.com. If you like this podcast, please subscribe, follow, listen, and tell your friends and tell your enemies. And please leave us a rating. We'll be back next week with another one.